everyone. In this video, I'm going to be taking a look at this thing. This is a Meepo Bamboo Hurricane, so that's fun. Let's go. And before we get into the review, there are a couple of disclosures that I think are important. First being that this Meepo Bamboo Hurricane was provided for free for review. Second, the affiliate link and discount code in the description of this video do earn me a commission from any of those boards that get sold, and so that is also something for you to be made aware of. I try very hard in pretty much all of my videos to be as transparent and as honest with reviewing products as possible. However, those are things that I think any audience member should be aware of and should use that information as you watch this review and any other review of whatever product you may or may not be interested in. Now, something to note about the release of the Meepo Hurricane Ultra is that the Ultra now basically comes with a configurator type of tool. So when you go online and look at the Meepo Hurricane, you can choose options for the deck type, the drivetrain, the battery, the wheels, different options for you to choose, which affects the price of the final configuration of board. And this one in particular that was sent to me for review is a bamboo deck with the Samsung 40T battery pack, traditional KingPin trucks, and the tubeless pneumatic wheels. Oh, and the gear drive, which is different from the belt drive that was on the original Hurricane, and so that's worth talking about. Also, I will say right off the bat, between the two battery options, I'm not sure why there is an option for a smaller battery. At this current time, the 12S4P is pretty much baseline standard for this style of board, and so I'll discuss this in more detail later, but I don't know why one would elect to go with a smaller battery. And the first thing I want to talk about with the Bamboo Hurricane is, of course, the deck. And wow, wow, the deck is just really, really good. It's not super flexible, whether you're just jumping on it for some reason or in ride, and so you can still maintain during ride quite a bit of control like you would with an entirely rigid board. However, there is enough give in this deck to dampen road texture, eat up some of the bumps, and create a much more comfortable ride than the carbon fiber deck that was on the original Hurricane, which is still available. But if someone has a choice, all specs being even between a rigid carbon fiber deck and a mildly flexible wooden deck, I would go with the flexible wooden deck almost every single time. The size and shape is very close to the Evolve Hadean. Very close. I like the Bamboo Hurricane deck a bit better, specifically because it's not as flexy, and so it's not as bouncy in ride. Flexible decks obviously have varying degrees of flexibility when you're standing on them. Depending on the type of wheels and the road conditions, a deck that's really, really flexible can bounce a bit and reduce the amount of control one might feel when they're riding at certain speeds. And so this particular deck is flexible, but it's not so flexible that I feel that I'm losing control at higher speeds or on very, very bumpy roads. The concave is very, very good. It's not painful or obnoxious, which is the case on some electric skateboard decks. The concave, especially near the center, is fairly subtle, but the flare-ups on the edges do give you enough leverage to really lean into a turn and push a little bit more if you feel you need a little extra from a turn. And now to talk about the drivetrain. This particular sample came with the gear drive. I've never been a big fan of gear drives in general, and my lens towards electric skateboard drivetrain types is probably a little bit different than most, specifically because I run a repair shop, and so most of the stuff that I see literally every day is already broken when I get to it. And so my perspective is a bit skewed towards belt drives because they're naturally easier to fix if they do break. Parts are a bit more standardized. It's much more easy to get parts that are not made by any particular manufacturer, and that's not the case with gear drives. Gear drives tend to be highly specialized designs, meaning that the gears and the pinions used within them are specifically designed to go with that assembly. So you can't just use any old gear from any old gear drive. You gotta get the one that fits. And again, as someone who runs a repair shop, it's usually a bit of a pain when they break, but this one didn't break, and so that's good. It's also an aesthetic thing. I kind of just like belt drives. I like the way they sound. I like the way they feel in terms of the ride response. But those biases were ones that I had to put aside in order to maintain an open mind when riding this board. And so these gear drives are pretty good. These gear drives in particular have what appear to be, I assume, a hard urethane buffer type of cushion thing that engages the wheel adapter against the wheel gear, and it is billed as being an impact mitigation device. So when you have a hard acceleration or deceleration or a swap between the two, the impact felt by the gears inside the gearbox is lessened by that cushion. Presumably this reduces the wear and risk of damage to the gears inside the gearbox. The idea behind it makes sense, and so at least there's that. So it should reduce the likelihood of a gear drive breakage, but as is the case with all things, time and a variety of uses by end users will probably illuminate possible failure rates for that. And so that's something to keep in mind if you've never used a gear drive before and you're not familiar with working with them or riding with them. This may or may not be an area of comfort or discomfort if you're looking at the options of a belt drive and a gear drive. Personally, I probably would still go with a belt drive because they are familiar, and if I'm someone that's just purchasing a board to ride and use and do recreational stuff with, I'd prefer something that's a bit easier to fix and slightly easier to source a more standardized type of part. These gear drives also actually do have much less drag than their alternative counterpart, the belt drive. And that carries with it a couple of interesting effects. This is kind of just a guess, but it seems that the reduced drag of the gear drive does have a positive effect on battery consumption. It's important to note that the original Hurricane shipped with a battery made of Molicel P42A cells, which are rated at 4.2 amp hours per cell, and now the Hurricane is shipping, if you're getting the larger battery, with the Samsung 40T cell, which is rated at a slightly lower capacity, I believe at 4 amp hours per cell. What this means in use is nowhere near as large as you would assume it to be. In applications like an electric skateboard with so few cells in parallel, the amount of actual delivered energy or delivered capacity of a battery is well below its rated number anyway. Plus, there are nuances to be found along the way in terms of pack construction, the resistance of the conductors used between the groups, and also the implementation of that battery alongside an ESC and how, when, and why current is drawn. It's these things that end up giving you the actual range of any particular device, and those numbers that are on spec sheets and data sheets and marketing materials don't give you anything like a complete picture. So that being said, what the hell does all this mean? The reduced drag of this gear drive in conjunction with the 40T cells in this battery gave me pretty much the exact same range as I got on the original Hurricane with the P42A cells and the belt drive. The reduced drag also seems to have another effect, which may be a bit negative in my opinion, and that effect has to do with the throttle response. It's a bit jerky, which I've kind of come to expect from most Meepo boards using this particular manufacturer of ESC. The ramping between throttle positions on the remote is not as smooth as it could be and is not as smooth as it may be in other manufacturers of ESCs. My guess is that the reduced drag of the gear drive doesn't mask the jerkiness of this ESC like the belt drive did on the original Hurricane. This is just a guess, of course, but my guess is that the belt drive's drag, specifically in the implementation of the original Hurricane and maybe the current Hurricane, that extra drag acts as a bit of a buffer between the ramping shifts of any particular position on the remote's throttle. And so while the ESC may be behaving in one way, the drag of the belt drive and how that affects your feel of the board under your feet ends up being not necessarily delayed, but smoothed out almost by the increased drag. And since the gear drive has less drag, that is no longer masked, and so it becomes more apparent. So the Bamboo Hurricane Ultra with a gear drive does, in ride, to me, feel much more jerky than the original Hurricane. It's not terrible, I got used to it, but I did have to get used to it. The coasting of the gear drive, or the free roll, is also actually really, really good. In this video clip, you can see me just sort of coasting along. It's a very, very minor downhill, and I was just accelerating and just letting it go until I had to hit the brakes. It's a really cool feeling, especially given that most of the belt drives I ride kind of slow me down on their own, and so that's an interesting thing to pay attention to. Moving on to the trucks. The trucks on this particular Bamboo Hurricane Ultra are the TKPs, or traditional KingPin trucks. And they too, like the deck, are excellent. And I see no reason to choose double KingPin trucks at all, period. Unless you specifically like to do low speed carve maneuvers all over the place. If that's your thing, great. Double KingPin trucks are suited for that. They're certainly not stable, and now that one has the option of choosing traditional KingPin trucks, or really any single KingPin trucks, in my opinion, that's the way to go, full stop. These trucks are good. They're wide, they look and feel nice, the turning is predictable, and the stability is absolutely there. During the range test, I was cruising at about 25-ish miles per hour. At some point, I looked down at the remote and it said I was riding at 28 miles per hour. I had no idea when that happened. And apparently during this ride, I hit about 31 miles per hour. This was not felt or even realized for the most part, and I would say that's a very good thing, because at no point during this range test or any of the higher speed riding did I feel sketched out, uncomfortable, unsure, or that this thing was going to start wobbling uncontrollably and toss me. Incidentally, the stock bushings, probably because of the trucks, feel totally fine. I tightened them a bit, maybe about half a turn on the front and the back, and I've had no issues with them whatsoever. I imagine changing these bushings out to a set of riptides would make them feel even better, and also, on traditional KingPin trucks, you have half as many bushings to change as you would on double KingPin trucks. I'd consider that a good thing. The tubeless wheels have no tubes. I was pleasantly surprised by these. The grip is great, the sidewalls are solid, there's no deformation in really hard turning if you're leaning and putting your body weight into it. They're very well balanced out of the box, and in ride, even at high speeds, they have no wobble or obvious vibrations or oscillations that you can feel that can lead to a bit of an unstable feel. These are solid out of the box, no notes. Changing the tires on these wheels is of course different than changing the tires on regular tubed e-skate wheels. It's not particularly difficult, and that's likely because I'm used to working on tubeless wheels like these, which are very difficult to change if you're not used to it. And so the ones on the Hurricane are much easier. I'll just roll in a clip of taking the hub apart and taking the tire off. All right, now the tubeless tires obviously are going to be removed slightly differently than a regular tubed e-skate tire. And so this is the front, the part that faces out. And so I've taken the screws off from the inward facing side, and there are three pieces to this hub. There's an outer bead ring, inner bead ring, and then the center. And so this one, if it's new or it's been seated for a while, this came off already, but it might stick. And so there's that. And so it's just a matter of then removing, this is with a 3mm hex. I found that it's a little bit easier to sort of push it in to loosen it, and a little bit of that, and it should pop out. Now you notice that there's actually an O-ring seal in here that the lip of the inner part of the hub sits in, and that's how it seals. You gotta avoid getting it too angled, because if it angles like this, because it's catching the valve stem, you're not actually gonna be able to get it out. So you wanna put pressure where the valve stem is. I like to do it with my thumbs, and if you keep it pretty much flush and push it out forward, pushing more near the valve stem, the top of that grommet's going to sort of like bend over, and you can squish it past the bead. So you sort of push it through with your thumbs, and then it'll sort of deform into there, because this is pretty soft. And the bead has a metal ring, so it's not really going to deform much. But then you just squeeze it. Make sure it stays as flat as possible, bracing this if you need to, wear gloves if you need to, and then just keep pushing it out until it squeezes past the bead. And once it does that, it should slide out. Getting it back in, I actually like to put this grommet back in there, right on the face of the bead. If you try to put it in all the way, you're not going to have the same kind of engagement angle, and this is going to not form around there. So I just catch this right on the side. And once you got it on the side there, it'll deform, and you can just push this past. So you squeeze it in there. See how it's deforming into the bead? And so you can just right there, and then it'll just pop right in. Now onto range. Very quickly, I was able to get a little over 21 miles on this particular battery, which is the Samsung 40T battery option. That was done with a total rider and equipment weight of 195 pounds in 52-degree Fahrenheit weather, traveling at speeds between 20 and 26 miles per hour for most of the ride, in a full headwind in both directions. My range tests are usually done in one of two places, usually at a bike path that travels along the water by the beach, and there is a constant wind coming off of the water no matter which direction you're riding in. And so I was riding into a very noticeable headwind going out and coming back. And all those things considered, I was able to run this battery out at 21.2, I think, miles. The power is good. It's about the same as my original Hurricane. So it does well on hills, even pretty steep ones. The pickup is really nice, especially in Speed Mode 4. I kind of stick to Speed Mode 3 because that extra jerkiness right off the line isn't really what I'm into, and it's still the case that you don't get a whole lot of mid to higher range power, so a lot of the punch just sits in that 0 to 10 or 12 mile per hour range, and then above that, it mellows out significantly. It still is, much like most mass production boards, nowhere near the power level of something like a really well-made DIY or a very high-end boutique type board. My reference for power and smoothness is my own build, the LaCroix Prototipo that I put together myself. That board in particular will continue accelerating aggressively all the way up until 33 miles per hour, no matter what incline it's on. And it also has essentially no jerkiness at any point in the throttle range. But that thing was not cheap and not easy to put together. But in terms of the full spectrum of power of electric skateboards, this Bamboo Hurricane sits pretty much right at the middle, which is fine for me. I'm very much a medium, regular kind of guy, except in the case of my Prototipo, because that thing is just perfect. I have no complaints about the power in the Bamboo Hurricane, and so that is where I will leave this. Especially considering that the price point of this configuration, the Bamboo Hurricane with the gear drive and the tubeless tires, is about $1,600. That's pretty damn impressive. And it's because of that, I really have no qualms or complaints with the power that is provided in this particular board. And so don't let me being spoiled by this thing take away from just how really damn good this thing is. The remote, I don't love it. I really liked the size and feel of the original Hurricane's remote. The M4 is the M4S remote. I thought this size and shape was really good. This is their new style remote. I believe this came on the Voyager also. It's fine, it's usable. I didn't actually have a problem with it or any actual issues during riding, but I don't love it. I thought this one was better, and I wish that they stuck with this shape and size for this board, so yeah. So to wrap it all up, the Meepo Bamboo Hurricane Ultra is a good board. And considering its price, it's a damn good board. I'll be doing a comparison relatively soon to the original Hurricane, as well as the Evolve Bamboo Hadian, because this is quite similar to that one. As always, relevant links are in the description below. I very much appreciate your viewership. Thank you so much. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so. Take care of yourselves, and don't fall.